I had always loved ghost stories. Something about the way they balanced on the edge of reality made them irresistible. So when I found myself in New York with a free evening, I didn't hesitate to book a ghost tour. It seemed like the perfect way to experience the city's haunted history, an adventure into the unknown, surrounded by strangers just as eager to be scared as I was. The group gathered at the corner of an old cobblestone street in Lower Manhattan. The guide, a thin man with deep-set eyes and a voice like shifting gravel, introduced himself as Peter. He wore a long coat that billowed slightly in the autumn breeze and carried an old lantern, more for effect than illumination. "This city is old," Peter began, scanning our faces, letting the moment stretch just long enough to make us uneasy. "Older than most of you realize. And the dead, well, they never really leave." A few nervous chuckles rippled through the group, but I stayed silent, eager for the stories to begin. We started walking, stopping at various locations while Peter regaled us with tales of spirits lingering in forgotten buildings, of footsteps echoing in empty hallways, of cold hands brushing against unsuspecting visitors. Each story had the kind of unsettling detail that made my skin prickle. But as much as I enjoyed the eerie atmosphere, nothing prepared me for the last stop. "This," Peter announced as we turned onto a narrow, dimly lit alley, "is one of the most peculiar hauntings in the city. Few know about it, and even fewer visit it willingly." I stepped closer, drawn in by his tone. The alley was lined with old brick buildings, their windows dark and lifeless. A single street lamp flickered at the far end, barely illuminating the space. In the center, standing on a worn pedestal covered in ivy, was a statue. The moment I laid eyes on it, something inside me shifted. It wasn't the eeriest sculpture I'd ever seen. At first glance, it was just a life-sized figure carved in weathered stone. But as the weak light from the street lamp stretched across its surface, I felt my breath hitch in my throat. The statue looked exactly like me. Not just a vague resemblance. Not just similar features. It was me. The curve of the lips, the angle of the jaw, the faint line between my brows that deepened when I was lost in thought. Even the way the hair was sculpted, slightly tousled as if caught in motion. I took a step back, suddenly feeling lightheaded. The world around me dulled, as if my senses were withdrawing, retreating from something they didn't want to comprehend. Who made this?" I managed to ask, my voice smaller than I intended. Peter turned to me, eyes glinting in the dim light. "That's the mystery, isn't it?" He stepped toward the statue, running a gloved hand along the stone. "No one knows who sculpted it. No one even remembers when it first appeared. Some say it was here before the buildings, before the alley itself. Others claim it changes, that different people have seen different faces staring back at them." A nervous murmur spread through the group, but I barely heard it. I was too busy staring into the statue's eyes. They were hollow, yet deep, as if the stone held something just beyond the surface, something trapped beneath its cold, lifeless skin. The resemblance was impossible. Statues take time, skill, planning, and yet here it was, mirroring me so perfectly it felt like looking into a frozen version of myself. A version that shouldn't exist. A cold breeze swept through the alley, making the ivy rustle. My stomach twisted. I didn't feel like I was looking at a piece of art. I felt like I was looking at something that was waiting. Someone behind me laughed nervously. "All right, this is creepy as hell," Peter smirked. "That's why it's the final stop." I wanted to step closer, to inspect it, to prove to myself that it was just an eerie coincidence. But a part of me refused. My feet remained rooted in place, as if approaching the statue would make something shift in the air, something I couldn't take back. "All right, folks," Peter called. "That concludes our tour for the evening. I hope you all make it home safely." The group started dispersing, some whispering excitedly, others glancing over their shoulders as if afraid something might follow. I lingered, staring at the statue, my heart hammering in my chest. I had come for a ghost story, but now I wasn't sure if I had just become part of one. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the statue's face, my face, etched in stone, staring back at me with that eerie stillness. My mind refused to let go of the impossibility of it. It wasn't just a trick of the light or a coincidence, it was me. I tossed and turned in the unfamiliar bed of my hotel room, but the sheets felt constricting, as though they were holding me down. The more I tried to rationalize it, the less sense it made. I wanted to believe that it was a fluke, that maybe I had just seen what I wanted to see in the dim light. But deep inside, I knew better. By morning, I had convinced myself that I needed to go back. I needed to see it again in daylight, where logic and reason could break apart the creeping dread that had settled in my bones. Maybe I had imagined the whole thing. Maybe I had been tired, my brain making connections where none existed, but I wouldn't be able to move on until I saw it again. The streets of Lower Manhattan were different in the daylight. Bustling with life, they carried no trace of the eerie quiet that had cloaked them the night before. The alley, however, remained unchanged. It still felt separate from the rest of the city, tucked away in its own forgotten pocket of time. The statue was exactly as I remembered it. My chest tightened as I stepped closer, the sense of wrongness only growing stronger. In the light of day, the details were even sharper. The precise shape of my features, the way my hair curled slightly at the ends, the familiar slant of my brows. But what sent ice through my veins was the expression on its face. It wasn't neutral, it wasn't blank. It was pensive, lips pressed together just slightly, eyes holding something between worry and knowing. It was an expression I had seen before. On myself, I swallowed hard and let my gaze drift downward to the base of the pedestal. That's when I saw the inscription. The night before, in the shadows, I hadn't noticed it. But now, with the sun cutting through the ivy, I could make out letters carved deep into the stone. My stomach twisted. I reached out, brushing my fingers over the name. It wasn't mine, but it was close. Too close. A name nearly identical to mine, off by just a letter or two, as if it belonged to someone who could have been me, someone who should have been me. I stumbled back, breath quickening. My pulse pounded in my ears. This was no coincidence, this was no fluke. Back again? The voice nearly made me jump out of my skin. I spun around to see Peter, the tour guide from the night before, standing at the mouth of the alley. His hands were tucked into his coat pockets, a bemused expression on his face. He must have noticed my reaction because his smirk softened slightly. Didn't get enough chills last night? I turned back to the statue, my throat dry. I didn't notice the inscription before. Peter stepped closer, peering at the base. He nodded slowly. Ah, yeah. That thing's weird, right? Whose name is this? He gave me a sideways glance. That's the question, isn't it? I waited for him to elaborate, but he just rocked back on his heels. Finally, I pressed, has anyone ever looked into it? Does anyone know who made it? Peter hesitated before answering. No artist has ever come forward to claim it. No records exist of its placement. He gestured around the alley. This space has been here for centuries, but the statue? Nobody knows when it first appeared. I stared at him, trying to process what he was saying. That doesn't make sense. Peter gave a small chuckle, but it was hollow. Most ghost stories don't. I turned back to the statue, unease curling around my ribs. Has it ever changed? Peter was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower, more careful. Some say it does. I looked at him sharply. What do you mean? There are stories. He exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. People claim it shifts, that different visitors see different faces. Some say it only takes on a familiar form when it's interested in someone. I felt a chill ripple through me. Interested? Peter shrugged. I don't make the rules. I just tell the stories. I wanted to laugh, to brush it off as a myth meant to spook tourists. But the weight in my chest wouldn't let me. The resemblance was too perfect. And the name, almost mine, felt like something whispering just beyond my understanding, beckoning me to step closer, to ask questions I wasn't sure I wanted answers to. Do you feel like you've seen it before? Peter asked suddenly. The question struck something deep in me, because, in a way, I did. Not just last night, not just today. Somewhere else. Somewhere I couldn't quite reach. I didn't answer him. I just stepped back, trying to ignore the way the statue's face seemed to be watching me, waiting. That night, I barely slept again. But this time it wasn't just unease that kept me awake. It was something else. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that I was letting an old statue and a few eerie stories get into my head. But no matter how much I tried to rationalize it, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The statue, the name, the way Peter had looked at me, it all gnawed at the edges of my mind. demanding my attention. So, despite every logical instinct telling me to stay far away, I found myself back in the alley the following night. The city was quieter this time, the usual hum of traffic and distant voices muted, as if the air itself had thickened. The alley's darkness felt deeper than before, its shadows more pronounced. The dim glow of a single flickering street lamp barely illuminated the statue, but I could still see it standing there, waiting. My breath hitched in my throat as I took my first real look at its face. The expression had changed. Last night, the statue had looked pensive, watchful. Now, its stone features were twisted in something closer to distress. The brows were furrowed, the mouth slightly open as if trying to form words. There was an unmistakable sense of urgency carved into its cold surface, as though it was desperate to communicate something. I felt a deep, visceral wrongness settle into my bones. Statues didn't change. They couldn't. But this one had. I took a shaky step backward, my pulse hammering in my ears. That's when I heard it. Footsteps. Slow. Measured. Just behind me. I whipped around so fast I nearly lost my balance. The alley was empty. The footsteps had stopped the moment I turned, but I knew what I had heard. My breath came in short, panicked bursts as I scanned the darkness, searching for any sign of movement. There was nothing. No wind. No scurrying rats. No distant voices from the street. Just silence. Oppressive, suffocating silence. I turned back to the statue, my skin crawling. The feeling of being watched was unbearable now, like invisible eyes pressing against me from every angle. I had to get out of there. I took another step back, forcing myself to break the paralysis of fear. The moment my foot scraped against the pavement, the sound of footsteps returned. This time they were running. Panic surged through me, cold and electric. I bolted from the alley, barely registering my surroundings as I stumbled back into the well-lit streets of the city. The noise of the world rushed back in all at once, honking cars, distant laughter, the chatter of pedestrians. But I didn't stop running until I was several blocks away, my chest heaving, my skin clammy with sweat. I turned, half expecting to see someone or something following me. But the streets were normal, busy, safe, and yet I couldn't shake the feeling that I hadn't really escaped, that somewhere in the shadows, something was still watching, waiting. I woke up to a splitting headache and a sick feeling in my stomach. My mouth was dry, my limbs heavy as if I had run for miles in my sleep. The sheets were tangled around me like I had fought against them in the night. For a moment, I couldn't even remember getting home. I sat up slowly, my pulse still too fast, my skin damp with sweat. The last thing I could clearly recall was running from the alley, my heart pounding as unseen footsteps chased me through the city streets. But after that, nothing. Had I blacked out? Had I really made it back to my apartment on my own? The alarm clock on my nightstand read 7:12 a.m. Morning sunlight slanted through the blinds, cutting my room into strips of gold and shadow. I swung my legs over the edge of the bed, my head spinning slightly as I stood. I needed water, coffee, anything to clear the fog from my brain. But the moment I turned toward the mirror, the air in the room seemed to thin. Something was wrong. My reflection stared back at me, but it wasn't quite right. My face looked the same at first glance, same tired eyes, same unkempt hair, but the longer I looked, the more it unsettled me. My posture was different. My shoulders were slumped in a way that didn't match how I was standing. My mouth was set in a neutral line, but there was something almost resentful in the way my lips pressed together. I lifted a hand hesitantly. My reflection copied me, but it felt delayed by the slightest fraction of a second. I blinked hard and shook my head, trying to clear the unease. Just exhaustion, I told myself. Stress, my mind playing tricks after last night's ordeal. But then, just as I turned away, my reflection lingered for a moment longer than it should have. A bolt of ice shot through my veins. I spun back, breath caught in my throat. My reflection was normal again, moving as I moved. But the feeling didn't leave me. Something was wrong. I had to go back to the alley. The city was awake now, people moving through their daily routines, oblivious to the gnawing dread twisting inside me. I forced myself to walk at a steady pace, even as every instinct screamed at me to turn around, to pretend none of this was happening. When I reached the alley, it looked the same as before, dark, narrow, forgotten by time. But the moment I stepped into the shadows, my breath hitched. The statue had changed again. Where before it had worn an expression of distress, now its face was frozen in an open-mouthed scream. The details were grotesquely precise. The way the stone lips stretched in agony, the deep grooves of fear carved into its features. And worst of all, it didn't look like me anymore. The resemblance was gone. The sharp angles of my face, the familiar features I had seen the night before, they had vanished. Instead, the statue now bore the face of someone else. Someone I almost remembered. A ghost of a memory tugged at the edges of my mind, elusive and taunting. I knew this face, or I had known it once. But from where? From when? A childhood friend? A stranger from a dream? The more I tried to grasp it, the more it slipped away, leaving only a hollow dread in its place. I stepped closer, my pulse hammering in my ears. The stone eyes seemed to see me now, not just reflect me. And the mouth, open in that silent scream, looked as if it had been caught in the middle of a desperate plea. I reached out a trembling hand, hesitating just before my fingers could brush the stone. A gust of wind funneled through the alley, whispering through the ivy. And in that moment, I felt it. Something watching me, not the statue, not my reflection. Something else. The world seemed to tilt, the shadows stretching, the air growing thick. My vision blurred, or maybe the space around me did. The sensation of falling gripped my stomach, but my feet were still on the ground. It was as if reality itself had become unsteady, shifting under an unseen force. And then, a whisper, right at my ear, too close. Not words, just a sound, a breath. I spun around, heart leaping into my throat. The alley was empty, but I wasn't alone. I knew I wasn't alone.